Okay, so last week we went over how to shade the eyes. And remember that obviously all of your images, your photos that you're working from, they're all going to be different, right? But at the same time, the human eyeball, has, in most cases, the same structure. So what we said for the eyes was that we were going to think about the actual eyeball itself underneath the eyelids, and then we were going to shade it as a three-dimensional object. The same thing happens with the nose, okay? So this is going to be true whether your nose is facing straight on like this one is, or whether your nose is facing a little bit to an angle, or even a total like profile view where it's totally 90 degrees to the side. The structure three-dimensionally for the nose is going to be basically the idea of three circles. So you have kind of a center circle, and then on either side you have two smaller circles. And depending on the proportions of your nose, okay, now remember, I'm not concentrating on proportions right now, I'm concentrating on values and structure. But the idea is that that center circle of the nose is kind of like where the bottom center part of the nose goes all the way up to about here. Okay, so there's your center circle. Think of that almost the same as you would think of an eyeball, so like a sphere, round shape. And then these two circles on the side might overlap differently depending on your actual dimensions of your actual face that you're drawing. So in my case, I probably drew these a little bit too wide and too far to the side, but the concept is the same. We're going to have one sphere in the center and then two other spheres that are next to it and might overlap it. Does that make sense so far? Yes or no? Okay.
So we should erase our nose if it doesn't work with those types.
Nope, not necessarily. Let me get through mine first and then it'll make more sense. So once you have your kind of your idea of that structure, okay, and the bottom line of that structure of the three circles should follow the proportions of whatever you have in your photo. So for example, this curve of the nose should still be where this curve of the circle is. And then this curve on the left side should be where this curve of the circle is. And then the middle will be obviously somewhere in the middle. That should all be plotted out in your contour lines already. And then the way this works is to go from this structure to this structure is we're going to use our curves here to put in our nostrils. Okay, now you have to go by what's in the photo. You can't just start making things up, right? So that might mean that you need to make adjustments to your circle structure based on what you know your photo proportions to be. So here in this case, I had to move this curve down because my nostril in this photo goes up higher than the bottom of that circle. Does that make sense? Okay, your results may vary in the photo that you have. You have to go by what you actually see. Remember we talked about that? Your brain will want to just assume that you know what a nose looks like, and then it will kind of take over, but you can't let it do that. You have to go by what you actually see. So instead of my curve being here, which sometimes it is in some photos, in my photo here, this curve actually comes down below the nostril because she has higher nostrils than the technique would actually draw for. Does that make sense? Okay. And then inside the nostrils, in this case, for this photo, okay, they kind of overlap here. If the person in your photo does not have as highly turned nostrils, then yours will be a little bit different, right? So the structure of the circles is just giving us the idea of that three-dimensionality. So we can think about shading this as a dimensional object. We're going to look and pay attention to where the highlights and shadows fall according to the photo. But the whole time we're thinking, how does that translate into a sphere or a round shape? Because if we don't keep that round shape in mind, then our sense of highlights and shadows is going to be very different, and it won't be as dimensional. So as I'm shading, I'm looking to see which areas of the nose go darker. And then, more specifically, not only how dark do they go, but how do they transition from dark to lighter. Okay? So in this case, the transition right here is a little bit sharper than the transition here. The transition here takes a little longer and is a little softer of a transition to go from dark to light. Now when I say dark to light, I need to also consider that if this is the white of a piece of paper, okay, even the highlight of that nose, the brightest part right here, is still not as white as that piece of paper. So I still need to shade everything to some degree. It's just a matter of getting the contrast right between where it's lighter and where it's darker. So I'm kind of preserving that lighter part, and then I'm going to shade above it. I'm going to shade to this side. Even though this side of the nose is lighter, I still need to shade a little bit. It's darker down here.
So it's pretty much the same thing in the eyes.
It's very, very similar to the eyes. It's just instead of thinking of one sphere shape, you're thinking of three that happen to be kind of blanketed together instead of the eyeball, which has just kind of one underneath the eyelids. There's something weird under my paper. And then on either side of these round shapes, I have to look at where the shadows fall. So in this case, there's a shadow back here that separates the nose, the highlight there, from the skin behind it. Okay, I might have gone a little dark with that. I would probably adjust. There's a shadow down here, but it doesn't go all the way across, so I need to fade that out. Again, yours is going to likely be different, so you're going to have to draw what you see. I need to pay really close attention to where the shadows are inside the nostril. And there might also be, like in this case, there might also be some highlights within that nostril. You have to pay attention. And then this whole side of the nose, in my case, because the light source is coming from this direction, that whole side of the nose is going to be a little bit darker. But even though I'm thinking spherically and this is a little bit darker, behind it is still a little bit darker yet. So I've got a sharper transition here. To delineate where the nose kind of curves under itself. And then that shadow also has a slow transition, a gradual transition into kind of the cheek area around it. No real highlight on this side of the nostril. Not until we get to down here. And remember, only in very rare cases are you actually going to leave any of this like completely untouched white paper. Everything will have some level of shading on it. You just have to figure out how dark that needs to be in order to be accurate. Does that make sense? Is that enough to get you going, or do you guys feel like you need a little more?
That's good.
You're good? All right, excellent.